Do you have
So,
a commissioner or?
so it's technically the office of the Future Generations Commissioner, but feel free to call it the Future Generations Office, the FG team. Like, it's very, very informal. We're all kind of very relaxed about it. But it's the commissioner and we're her team.
Okay, so we are officially live on Facebook. I wanted to say hello to everyone. We are the Young Greens of Ohio. My name is Austin Bashore. I'm currently the interim leader of the Young Greens of Ohio. Lacey, can you introduce yourself? Or Mackenzie, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Mackenzie Lacey. I am part of the Ohio Green Party Youth Caucus and the Presidential Support Committee for the Green Party. And I am co-hosting with Austin.
Today, we are joined live by a member of the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner of the Government of Wales, Kate Seary. Hello, Kate. Welcome to our live stream.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's just great to be here.
Can you introduce the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner of the Government of Wales and what you do for your country?
Yeah, absolutely. So the story of kind of how the Act came about is kind of really centered around one very committed visionary called Jane Davidson. And so the WellBeing of Future Generations Act is the first kind of piece of legislation in history to place kind of regenerative and sustainable practice at the heart of government. So basically, the Act connects social, environmental, economic, and cultural well-being right into the heart of government. So every single policy that goes through the Welsh Government has to think about future generations. It has to meet sustainable goals, and it has to meet our sustainability development principle. And this basically means that bodies have to act in a manner which seeks to ensure that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So my job, I'm a team support officer, so I pretty much work across the board on every single possible topic that you can imagine, trying to get the government to reach these goals and make sustainable decisions, which is what the Act is kind of centered around.
How did this Act and how did this role come about in the first place?
So what's really interesting is that the Welsh Government has only been around since 1999, if I get that right, only a few years after I was born. And so Jane Davidson was a minister, she was a politician, and she basically saw the world around her as not looking, as ignoring the future and making making decisions that focused on the now, and realized that is not good enough. The world's falling apart around us and we're not doing anything about it. And so she proposed this legislation. And so it didn't actually end up being passed until 2015, which is when this legislation came in. And this legislation created the Future Generations Commissioner. So the Act is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act, and this creates a commissioner. And her role is to advise and support all the public bodies in Wales on how to reach these sustainability goals. So that's how it comes about. And then now she has a team of 22 of us around her to help her do that.
My question is, how did the commissioner convince the government to listen to the people to help their government? And can you give us here in the US any tips about how to try to get our government to listen to us?
Okay, so the way that we did it really was to create a movement. And this is what we talk about a lot, is creating a movement around the ideas that we have. And so what we did in Wales to get this legislation passed is we held a national conversation in Wales, which we called the Wales We Want. And this was a consultation that went out across Wales to see what the views of the Welsh people wanted. And it turns out that they want sustainability and they want to look after their children's children and their children's children's children. So I think that's kind of the tip that I would give, is anyone, no matter what their political views are, if you bring it down to how their children's lives will be in the future, really most people's views are the same, because they want their children to be prosperous, and they want them to be resilient and healthy, and they want them to have equal opportunity. And so if you boil away all the noise, actually, when you ask people what they want for the future, it actually tends to be pretty similar. You might have very different views on other policies and the economic system, but actually most people want their children to live in a world that's going to treat them right. And so that would be my advice, really, is have this conversation with people, have it publicly, and that way voices often aren't ignored, and they can't when they're in big numbers. And that's what we did in Wales, is we asked people if they wanted something like this, and they said yes. And once you've done that, it's quite hard to ignore it.
When speaking of the economic changes that we need to make, the United States has some of the worst economic inequality that we have ever seen in human history. So what are the types of changes that your office and the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner are attempting to make a more fair economic society?
Yeah, absolutely. So the system's broken, is our view, really. We kind of need this radical shift away from an economic system that doesn't serve us, doesn't serve our future generations, which is the whole point. And for too long, we think that governments have tested their success on measures of economic growth and increases in GBA and increases in GDP. And this idea that if you keep growing the economy and growing this and that, we'll be happier and healthier. But actually this focus on growth is probably what is causing climate change, and what is causing poverty, and what is causing inequality. So what we're doing in Wales is trying to shift that. And so what we actually measure our success on are the 7 well-being goals that is the core to the Act. So these 7 well-being goals are a prosperous Wales, a resilient Wales, a healthier Wales, a more equal Wales, a globally responsible Wales, a Wales of cohesive communities, and a Wales that has vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language. And so, for example, when the Welsh Government thought it was a good idea to spend like £1.4 billion on a motorway, a quick check of these well-being goals told them that this wasn't the way to tackle the issue. And a look at these metrics kind of tell us, well, if we want a healthier Wales, and if we want to hit climate targets, and if we want to protect nature, and we want a more equal community, then the real way of dealing with it was investing in public transport and active travel, and not just expanding and growing what we already have or what seems like the quick fix. Because if we have better active travel and we have better public transport, then we have healthier people. We have good public transport that is cheap to everyone. You're reducing the inequality that's there. And so that's how we're mostly trying to tackle inequality, is by having equality knitted into every single policy and every single decision that we make.
What is one of the biggest obstacles the commissioner has faced?
I think, and obviously I'm putting words in her mouth now, but one of the biggest obstacles really is trying to get people to understand how things are linked. And so for so long, people that work in transport, they work in transport, and the people that work in health, they work in health, and that's what they do, and that's, everyone has their position in society, and everyone kind of stays in their boxes. What we're trying to do is saying that actually that's really the wrong way of looking at it, and actually we need to bring people from different walks of life into decision making. So for instance, if we take this one example of where we've tried to knit health and the environment and transport all into one, we've had people coming from a public health lens and looking at our transport strategy and saying, actually, if we put money into active travel, then we're reducing our kind of emissions. We're also getting more people active. and we're dealing with the transport issue, right? So what we've done in Wales is we've invested in travel, in active travel, and also in like our cycle infrastructure within cities. And we also, so like to put the public health kind of spin on this, and this is what I really enjoy, is that actually doctors can prescribe free bike hire for people who need to kind of be more active. And so then again, it's like improving our kind of inequality issue, because we're giving people ways of traveling, but also they're able to lose weight and live a more healthy lifestyle, but also reducing emissions. And so I think that's our issue at the moment, is trying to get people on the side of that, and to kind of feel like they can break out of their boxes and they're not stepping on people's toes by a doctor talking about transport or planning, but actually it's all linked together.
So sometimes in Ohio, we have an issue where local communities often take a step backwards on the environment. For example, we have some local communities and community organizations voting to allow fracking or environmental degradation of their communities. How do we go about that when we have a group of people or a citizen town that allows type of backwards mobility?
So I guess if you're kind of talking about maybe like when the people aren't agreeing with maybe what's best for the environment, and so I think the issue that we have here is that we have the people's views and we vote people in based on our views, and kind of hope that our views are then kind of taken and put into law. But I think actually what we do have is a representative democracy, and we have elected officials for a reason, in the hope that they make the right kind of informed decisions that are the best for everyone. So you kind of give this the fracking example, and lots of scientists and climate change kind of experts are saying this is really not the best thing for the planet, and this is not the best thing for future generations, and that is opposing to what some people want that have voted, and I think that's okay, and I think it's okay for the people that we elect to talk to experts in the field and make decisions that may not be popular, may not get them re-elected, but someone has to shine the light and take care of the planet and the people that are in it. And I think in these kind of like challenging times, we've seen quite a lot of examples of that. So our First Minister here in Wales actually had to make some really tough decisions that went against like the popular opinion, to keep us safe during COVID, and it worked. And the people re-elected him, but at the time he was deeply unpopular. But it was like the decisions that had to be made. And I think that there's parallels there, was that actually as human beings, we don't always know what the right thing is until later on down the line. And I think the wider issue is that politicians are so worried about losing their jobs or losing money and being re-elected that the right decisions aren't being made at either level, at the kind of people level, but also at the representative democracy level. And I'm sure you see parallels of this with like big lobbying groups in America and having politicians in their pockets and kind of preventing real progress from happening. So I think what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is that we need politicians that are brave and will stand up for what's right and that will work together. And I think really that's my answer, is that people aren't always going to know what's right for them, and that's why we elect people to make those decisions for us. And that's kind of, I think, what I'm trying to say.
You talked earlier about how to get the government to listen to you, but in America we have an issue where the government does not really take responsibility for what the people want and what their well-being is. How could we in America get a government or create a government that is responsible for the people that they govern's well-being?
Yeah, so what we need is structural change is what we're saying. And that is where our act comes in very handy, because it puts the responsibility of the well-being of people now and of the future right in the hands of the government and in the public bodies. They can't get away from it. And like the great thing about our act is it requires collaboration and it requires integration, and so our politicians have no choice but to work together. It's structural, it's put right there in the legislation. They have this duty to look after the people. And as you said, right now in the States, that's not happening. And there's more structures to keep politicians fighting against each other rather than encouraging working with each other. And that is a huge issue, and that is what we're trying to tackle. Is we're trying to tell politicians that no, actually now this is on you. All of like every kind of person in Wales can do their bit, but until there is a structure in place that ensures that we're fighting for equality and we're fighting to reduce our impact on the planet, and we're trying to get people to be healthier, and that is all connected, and it has to be in that structural position. Otherwise it's just not going to happen, because people don't make those links on their own. People don't work together in the way that we want to, in the way that we see is working, if that's not in place.
What wait a second. What type of relationship does this act and does the Commissioner Office have with Westminster in the UK Parliament?
Okay, so at the moment, Westminster doesn't have any acts like this. And I don't know how many of your listeners will kind of know the ins and out of of Westminster and then the Welsh Government. But what I'd liken it to is your national government and a state government. So we've got Westminster that kind of has some power over lots of areas that are across the UK, but then we have devolved powers to Wales. And so that means that Wales has power over health, and it has powers over transport, it has powers over culture. But then the UK kind of fills in the gaps. So Wales doesn't have any power over our kind of like foreign aid or immigration, or like our kind of like that sort of thing. So it's a bit pick and mix in a way. But really Welsh politics and UK politics are kind of worlds apart. And the Welsh people vote pretty much in the opposite way that the UK votes as a whole. So for instance, now the Labour Party have a pretty much near majority in Wales, but is still ruled by a Conservative UK government in Westminster. So opinion is very split. But what we are doing is we're working with Westminster politicians, because of course we are, because, you know, integration, collaboration. We're working with Westminster politicians to get a version of the Future Generations Act through Westminster. So Lord Bird sits in the House of Lords in Westminster, and he has introduced a kind of Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. So it's along the similar vein, but it's unlikely to be the same because of the difference in politics. So Wales tends to have a bit more kind of progressive, kind of more like left, even more left-wing probably than most parties in the States, but more left-wing. So it's kind of was easier to get this idea of a progressive economy and progressive well-being kind of ideas through. So it's going to have to be a bit different, but we're working on it, and we're trying to get this kind of bill through Westminster too, because we want the whole country to feel the benefits that the Welsh people are also feeling. And of course we work with internationally all the time, and we're trying to get other countries to also introduce this bill. So Scotland, the SNP, who have just won the election there, in their manifesto, they included a WellBeing Act. So we're hoping that they're the kind of the second government to introduce an act just like ours to look after, well, the future generations.
What is the role of LGBTQ people, immigrants, and people of color in this movement?
Yeah, so a more equal Wales is the key part of the wellbeing goals. And again, we believe that equality is connected to everything that we do. So equality is linked to climate change, and healthcare and schooling and access to nature it's all there. And so equality runs through all of our policy recommendations. So kind of the key vision is that people in Wales will have a fair chance in life to prosper and thrive, regardless of their age or their circumstances. And we're trying to create a world where all individuals, kind of regardless of who they are, or the challenges they face, have a fair opportunity to be as healthy and free as possible, and a world where kind of intergenerational poverty will be a thing of the past. And really that our salaries won't be kind of a key measure of value. So to touch on kind of a few of the kind of groups of people that you were talking about then, one of our recommendations is a race equality strategy. So that kind of includes, well, across the board basically, as we know that during COVID, people from the BME communities were affected more by COVID. So why is that? Why are we not looking into healthcare that is kind of, we're not just looking at how it affects white people? What that's been such a history of our healthcare system. We need to change that. We need to ensure that we understand difference when it comes to healthcare and how we can treat people better based on them as individuals, not as a homogenous group. You talked about the LGBT community. Well, we've tried to introduce, or Wales have just introduced, inclusive sex and healthy relationship education as mandatory in schools. So that's like an example there. Unfortunately, immigration isn't a devolved issue, and so we technically don't have any powers in Wales to legislate. But what we can do, and what we do push for, is a Wales of cohesive communities, and that isn't just for people who were born and bred in Wales. That includes anyone that comes knocking. So we're kind of pushing for an inclusive Wales where we can give a helping hand, really, under the value that we're all human, and kind of under the idea that no human can be illegal. We're kind of this globally responsible country that looks out for others and doesn't really believe that someone that turns up on our doorstep needing help isn't allowed. That isn't kind of, yeah, we're a country that wants to open our arms to people that need help.
Madam Commissioner Howe often talks about well-being, and the term well-being. What exactly is that, and how can we gauge it? Is it economic growth? Is it happiness? How do we gauge that type of intangible ideology?
Yeah, well, well-being is vague. I'll be honest. The kind of word well-being means a lot of different things to different people. But the way we test it is through the 7 well-being goals. So we can't really claim to have a country focused on well-being until we are a prosperous nation, a resilient, healthy, equal, global, responsible, cohesive, I think I've remembered all of them, country. But to me, like specifically, it's like well-being feels like this kind of like big sigh of relief, is that you've kind of like woken up from a terrible dream, but then you kind of wake up in a place that you're like, oh, actually no, like I have the health care that I need, I have the schooling that I need, I know that my children are safe and are well, and there's a safety net to catch me if I fall. So I think that's kind of my idea of well-being, is that it's this feeling of safety. And that doesn't mean that the people in Wales aren't kind of expected to work hard or kind of push themselves. And it's not, oh, well, the government will save me. It's not about that. It's about understanding that people have difficulties and they have struggles, and that someone will be there to catch them. But on like a specific basis, in the office, how we work with public bodies is that we're purely an advisory kind of supportive office. And when we work with public bodies, we're working with them, not against them. And so we don't rank different institutions on their well-beingness or test well-being as such. We of course write reports, and we have powers to investigate, and we do that by looking at the work that they're doing. But generally, it's using the well-being goals to look at the policies that they're making and look at the work that they're doing. And really, it's just looking at progress. We're always looking that bodies and institutions are taking that extra step to ensure that the lives of future generations are going to be better than ours. Because right now, if we stay in the way that we are, our children's children are going to find life harder. They're going to be in a world that is not easy to live in, is getting smaller and smaller every day. They're not going to be as healthy. They're going to be poorer if we don't start looking after them. And that's why our vision is always 25 years in the future. We're never looking. I think some people think, oh, thinking about the future, that must be what, 5 years down the line? No, it's 25 years, it's 50 years, it's 100 years. And because we want to break this trend that the future generations are going to be less well off than ours. And I think, yeah, so when I think of well-being, I think this, like, just this feeling of comfort, of like a good friend, that someone's going to be there to kind of pick you up when you fall.
Okay, for our last question, can you highlight the positive improvements that the office has seen carried out since it's started?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a number of things, and I've already kind of spoken slightly about how the Act requires public institutions to work together. So, for example, I said about the health workers using the public health lens and looking at transport issues, and that has been a huge kind of positive improvement to the country, is that we've seen people working together. But what we are really seeing is our recommendations popping up in Welsh politics all the time. So we very recently had our national election. Actually, it was on the 6th of May. So we're only like a week into our new government, although it's basically the same government as before. We haven't changed. Wales hasn't really changed its views since 5 years ago. But yeah, we are seeing all these recommendations pop up in Welsh politics. So the recent election manifestos had many of our recommendations in them. And only yesterday, the new government in Wales announced its new cabinet, and we saw new roles that integrate different sectors that should have been working together all along. So the government announced a climate change ministry that will bring together the environment, housing, planning and transport into one portfolio. So one decision can't be made without the other, and all of these kind of these subjects which never really should have been kind of made decisions on separately before, are all being brought together into one. And that was one of our recommendations to the government, to introduce this climate change ministry. And then a really big win for the office, and this happened just today, so it's very exciting, is that the First Minister of Wales committed to a universal basic income pilot for Wales. And
that's awesome.
So yeah, so what this is really awesome, it's really exciting. This has been a key lobbying point for us. There's a lot of research that's gone into this, and a lot of working with politicians to try and get this through. But for Wales, this means that citizens would be given a sum of money from the state to cover the basic cost of living, basically. So it's just like I was talking about, that sigh of relief, that little comfort blanket to catch you. And yeah, so the First Minister's committed to that. So that's going to be really interesting to see that come in. And see how the pilot works. How I'm not 100% sure yet how the pilot will go, whether it will be a specific area in Wales or it'll be wider net for the first pilot of it. But it's moving in the right direction. Like I was talking, just always that little bit of progress, and that's kind of what the impact that we're having, and we're seeing more and more impact the longer that the Future Generations Commissioner is a thing.
I want to thank you all for joining us today on our live stream this evening. I wanted to thank the Welsh Future Generations Commissioner's Office for joining our live stream, Kate Seary, Mackenzie for co-hosting as well, and all the viewers watching at home. Thank you so much for joining in, and we will see you next month.